Good morning, everybody. Welcome to DSET Day 3. It is our final day, so there's plenty still to come, and plenty going on down in the Expo Hall with the Careers Fair as well. In terms of our conference programme for today, there's been a slight change to the printed guide, but we have the Calian Defence Complex Training Workshop in here, and we'll be live streaming that, so anybody dialing in, please have your questions at the ready for the chat. Across in the Heineken Lounge, there is the Serious Games panel and award ceremony, and then we'll be breaking for coffee. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jay Ballard of Calian Defence. Thank you.
Morning. All right, excellent. So what we'd like to do with this is going to be a workshop on complex training events, putting them together, getting them organized and delivered. We'd like this to be interactive because, you know, we don't want to just stand up here, and I'm not going to stand up here for an hour and a half beaking at you on receive. So I'd like to see what kind of challenges you have putting these things together. Do you have interoperability issues? Are you able to drive the C2 systems you want to? These are all things we can talk about, and how to immerse the training audience in the training. So the group that we have here, do you guys want to intro yourselves real quick, and then we'll get going?
I use this. Yeah, so my name is Eric Norton. I'm the emerging technologies leader for Calian, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about AI later on in the talk, and yeah, you're up.
Yeah, sir. Hello, and I'm Dan Turcotte. I'm with SimFront, which is a Calian Group owned company, and I'll be talking a little bit more about interoperability, integration, and data exploitation.
Good morning. I'm James Cushar. I'm from Mabway, again another Calian Group company, and I'm going to be giving a perspective on the role play aspects of immersive training.
Thank you. And I'm Jay Ballard, Vice President, Defense and the Learning Business Unit at Calian. We got 4 different business units, but we're in charge of all the military training and simulation that we do, which is in Canada, which we've been doing since 1997. We have a strong presence in NATO at the Joint Warfare Center and JFT in Stavanger and JFTC Bydgoszcz, along with a bunch of other NATO training that we're doing, and then other NATO member nations where we're delivering training as well. So. All right, so here's our goal. We wanted to have an interactive workshop that gets input from you, questions from you, and then we're going to try and help solve any kind of challenges you have from a general standpoint. We're not trying to sell anything in particular. What we're trying to do is try and work with you and see what challenges you have and how we can help. And look at it from the aspect of modern training challenges. So incorporating what's going on in Ukraine, and also in Israel and Gaza, and those fights. What might you need to pull from that? What kind of training do you want to integrate into yours to make sure your forces have the best chance for success? Oh, and you're wondering, why is there an F-16 with Navy on it? Well, it's an adversary aircraft, and my friends give me grief when I mention that, yeah, I used to be a fighter pilot in the Navy and flew F-16s and 2,000 hours and Hornets and 537 arrested landings in an aircraft carrier, and I owe beers every time I say that, so they're very happy to hear me mention all that. All right. So here's the overview. We're going to talk about design for complex exercises and the structure, how we go about that, the importance of immersive synthetic training environment and interoperability. That's kind of the secret sauce. You take the experts and you pair them with technology that makes the event immersive, and you get an excellent training opportunity. And I'll talk a little bit further about that. The impacts of AI. Eric, who's been working with the Microsoft engineers, the engineers that go into the brains of large language models, and he's been working closely with them and developing products with us, and has seen the pitfalls that can happen if you're trying to incorporate AI without really figuring out what you want to do with it. And also he'll talk about what some of the shortcomings are there. And then the final bit is where we're going to really get into the nuts and bolts training for modern warfare. So complex exercise design. First off, this is not the only way to do it. Our training design, exercise design, development, delivery process is very similar to NATO's, aligns with Canada's, and we go through, build a house, step by step, structurally, so it's very sound, and you can get the output that you're looking for. And it starts with training objectives. That's the output. What does that commanding officer of that unit need? What do the forces need for those units that are undergoing training? I mean, training a lot of times is fun, except when you're out in the field and it's minus 40 Celsius and the wind's blowing and you're in a tent and the heater doesn't work anymore. That's what the Army guys tell me all the time. I was on an aircraft carrier where it was always 21 degrees Celsius and you had warm water coming out of the shower. But if you're spending that money, you want to make sure you're getting something for the output, and you want well-trained forces coming out of there. And it starts with the training objectives. On the upper right-hand side, that's just a representative. Those are some NATO higher level training objectives, and you can see where that exercise is going to address some of those, and you want to track and see exactly when you're triggering those training objectives to happen by stimulating the audience, forcing them to react, making them feel like they're actually in a real world situation. And it's easier if it's institutionalized rather than bespoke. Most countries have, they have a training plan or a managed readiness plan, but is it funded and resourced all the way through? Is it predictable? When you show up in a unit, do you know that in 2 years you're going to be going through a brigade or a division level exercise that's complex? Most of the time you do, but is it hitting very specific training objectives so you have a baseline capability across your forces? That was one of the things that when I was in the Navy in the late 80s, early 90s, when the Berlin Wall fell, there was an attempt to cut money from the training programs and reduce flying hours. But we had 42 different mission areas that we had to be proficient in, and that required a lot of hours, more than 25 hours per pilot per squadron, and they wanted to cut it down to 16. So we were just like, okay, you want us to do all this? And you're cutting our funding down to here. We can only do this amount. So then they funded us for the full amount, but they said, we want a predictable outcome for a minimum baseline. So the training program was aligned at that point to do precisely that, where it was resourced, funded, and you knew if you showed up in a squadron, in the next 3 months, you're going to go through SFARP and build up to doing an air wing training exercise that put everybody together and be deployable at the end of that and be proficient in all the mission areas you need. Some countries don't do that as well as others, and that should be really where you're trying to get to. And with the ability for leadership to look at what's the readiness levels for these different squadrons or these different units in the country. How many different training layers, levels of training layers how many layers of training levels are you looking at? So there could be individual training going on with a division level exercise output. If you're putting joint terminal attack controllers in the mix, along with the FOOs and your imagery analysts together, you can have individuals working on their training skills. Their input plugs directly in. That's where you get the strategic corporal that's able to impact an exercise directly. They can work on their skills, and it plugs into the bigger picture. So E3 development goes with scripting writing boards that come in. So you're going to have an overall design to the exercise, which will support the training objectives, bring in the teams that are going to do the writing, and we'll be able to talk a little bit about that, how we have some technology that improves that capability. But then you want to make a master events list, master inject list is going to be the output of that. Before that happens, you need to make sure the design is right and everything fits together. And I said Eric will talk a little bit about Maestro, but I'll hit it right now. So in order to do an exercise well and have the events and the injects aligned with the training objectives, have them sequenced so that you're not overloading the training audience with 15 different things happening all at once, but you're able to do a building block approach. and get them to an end point. That's one of the key things that you need to do. And when I first moved up to Canada after I retired from the Navy, we put together a very large brigade level training exercise. We had no exercise design tool available to us at that time. Holy smokes, what a goat rope, because you had no idea how far along you were in developing all of the products and getting them into the exercise director who could track and see where everything was. You had no way to maintain version control. I don't know how many times I went in to see somebody and, hey, where's this file? Oh, it's in the folder marked Haas, and Haas yesterday, and Haas, this is the one I'm talking about. So you go in and you've got 15 different versions of an inject. And as you can imagine, if you didn't have the version control proper, then you would lose track of which one was right. You could have the wrong day in there, and it just needs to be aligned. And that's one of the things that Maestro does, is lets us keep them all together sequentially, and you've got a good copy to go with that. Now, while you're doing that and setting up the development and design on the exercise, you need to make sure you have the simulation architecture or the simulated environment architecture right and laid out properly. So what type of simulated environments are needed to support triggering and training objectives? And you see a lot of really cool technology downstairs, and that helps out a bunch, but you don't necessarily need any technology or any simulation to make this happen. What you want to do is get the training audience immersed. They need to, and what do I mean by that? They believe they're in that situation. They believe that their actions are reflective of real world. They're talking to units and people that they expect to be able to talk to in the real world. And if you do it right, you've actually got your players that are supporting are the ones that are going to be deploying with them as well. So you're building trust as they go through this. So you could have the coolest technology in the world, but what you really need for an output may require a map you see right there, or some other reflective real world capabilities. And in fact, I'll ask James to come up from Mabway to talk about how they put real world players in these kind of scenarios.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, so just to give you a little bit of context from where I sit. So we've been providing immersive training support largely through role play to the British Army for a number of years now, and we've seen it evolve over time. From when it was really just sort of large groups of people supporting major operational deployments to something that is much more complex and much more diverse. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment in a bit more detail. But our support and the way the British Army integrates role play is in individual training, it's in collective training, it's in professional military education, it's in the live environment, it's in the virtual environment, and the constructive also. And the role play itself, I think just referring to role play, people have a different interpretation of what that is. From our perspective and what we're asked to provide, it is a very broad spectrum of support, ranging from contribution to XCon, HighCon, in particular white cell, green cell, red cell, to bring in subject matter expertise and capability to enhance the immersive nature of training. At a lower level to that, the role players with which the training audience will interact can again has become increasingly diverse, from different types of role play to essentially bring the human terrain into play and all the complexity and challenge that comes with that. The most important thing from our experience is the role play activity, at whatever level it happens to be, must be integrated into the exercise design from the outset. Now, we're very fortunate in the support that we provide to the British Army because we are intimately involved in the exercise design. developing understanding the training objectives, understanding and generating aspects of the operating environment, producing OSW, writing the MIL, producing the injects, and so on for a range of different training events at different scales from divisional level downwards, and again, and into individual training and PME. So our experience is, integrate the role play, the immersive aspects, the immersive contribution to training into the exercise design, and then the opportunity is going to be maximized. Selection of the role players themselves, and again, ranging from the senior mentor to the divisional commander, down to the people that are going to populate the battle space, is really important. They've got to be suitable, they've got to be credible, they've got to be experienced, got to be matched to the training audience with whom they're going to interact with. Having said that, we always work by the maxim of we're in the business of representation, not replication. So we're looking for a solution that will support the delivery of the training objectives. We don't necessarily need, unless it's requested, the subject matter expert, the person that has been the UN Secretary General. If that's not required, then we can have somebody who can credibly represent that through their background and experience and so on. Just delving down to a little bit more detail, plainly, to get the most out of the role play activity, again, at any level, we certainly find the time spent briefing prior to the event, passing on as much information as we can within the security caveats and so on, is really worthwhile. So people arrive at the event knowing what they're going to be doing, who they're going to be interacting with, what the operating environment is, what the training objectives are. And then once they've arrived, more detailed briefing, rehearsal, wargaming can take place. And then, of course, there are some do's and don'ts in terms of the role player behaviours. And particularly with the people who are going to be interacting with the training audience, it's all about, sticking to the script, not going off piste, staying in character, but thinking on your feet and providing, the depth and context as required. And then the other important aspect that we have found is provision of feedback. The role players have access to the exercise construct and the training audience that not necessarily the observer controllers are going to have, and therefore they should be accessed. They should be asked for their feedback, and that can be integrated, moderated, and then fed into the after action review and lessons process. But certainly we have seen the value of the integration of role play again at every level, and I think it's important not to just sort of focus on the guys in the picture there. It's every level from senior mentor downwards, and they certainly bring that complexity and challenge that's required to reflect contemporary operations.
Okay. Awesome, thank you, James. So actually, can I see a quick show of hands? How many people are actually involved in putting together complex training events, just to get a feel for the audience? Okay, a few. All right, thank you. Now, so what James just talked about for role players, like, well, okay, that's when you put live and you incorporate, well, you may or may not incorporate simulated units around those as well, which we've done, where in Canada at Wainwright, the battle group was in the box, all live with Miles gear or Cubics gear, and they were playing out. We surrounded them with more friendly forces with constructive simulation, so they were able to follow the orders of the HICON, which was one CAN div that was playing. So you had the realism of not only you had the group inside the box live, but now the command post had to worry about all the other forces there. Fighting against a thinking enemy, thinking adversary, that was also simulated, except in the box, the live players that were adversary. So now you have a much larger ability to exercise, much greater span of control than that the staff and the headquarters and the commander had to worry about. So it's a way to ramp up training, put it at a higher level, incorporating live, virtual, and constructive simulation into one training event, stacked with JTACs, Joint Terminal Attack Controllers. So it was very realistic and was representative of where they wanted to go, and we were able to support that. So that was a huge win as far as we're concerned. And if you can look at incorporating that, it's more economical, because now you're able to get a much larger training event. But those individuals and those units that are inside getting the specific training they need do that, but the secondary training audiences are all able to reap benefits from that. All right, so talked a little bit about some of the putting that together. Now, if you're doing a live virtual constructive or just a constructive and virtual exercise where you're incorporating different simulation systems together, that gives you, and not having to worry about the live, it still gives you a very complex exercise. And that's one of the things that we have been working on. We've been doing since 2008 is taking these different system agnostic approach that we look at in taking whatever that nation has for simulation systems, such as VR Forces for Mac. It could be Bohemia's VBS4 tied from a virtual simulation, like a first-person shooter type simulation system, and including JCATS, Abacus for constructive simulation or entity simulation. And Dan I'll ask Dan to come up and talk a bit about how this is all put together so that the training audience has a seamless experience and everything that's happening in simulation makes sense and is linked up.
All right, so for integration and interoperability, and the show of hands was just a few, so I'm kind of wondering who I'm talking to, not quite sure. But one thing I would like to say just above, first and foremost is, it's quite a humbling experience actually to sit or stand in front of you people, which I know very well have been in this business and have been doing training and simulation for a hell of a long time. And for me to come up here and say anything useful, but I will certainly try. So number one, and I'd like to kind of step back and just say, why do we do this? First of all, because to recap what has been said so far, we've talked. I don't think anybody here needs to be convinced about the need to train. That's fine. I don't think anybody needs to be convinced about having proper exercise design, and we certainly have tools, and you've seen that. And if you don't have one already, then obviously that's on you. But in essence, everything that's been said so far is about preparing those troops. So from my perspective, before you even get into the technology, you have to get this first piece right. And that's that exercise design and, basically making sure that all those interactors or anything, all those resources you're going to need, you're going to be able to have them or bring them to bear before you even talk about technology. So why do we really do it? Well, I've spent, 32 years in the Army myself. And I can say that you don't need to spend 32 years in the Army to find out why. Because when you're initially trained yourself, there's one concern you have on your mind is if you have to deploy, one thing you'd like to do is be able to come home. So really, this is about winning the battles. This is about being ready. This is about achieving the high readiness levels that you need. And obviously, the more you scale, the more collective that's going to be, the more complex that's going to be. So everything about exercise design you've heard so far, everything about, bringing those interactors to bear, it is all about that ultimate outcome of winning and coming home with everybody. That's it. So what do you need? You're going to need that environment. If you're going to use technology to assist to recreate that environment, you're going to want it to be as realistic as possible. And in that context, you may need, as you know, no single tool is ever perfect to do everything. And and even if one would be, it would change very rapidly, because the environment change, the operating environment changes, the technology changes, and you know, there's constant change. And we know that as well. So in order to keep pace with it, in order to continuously adapt to it, you're going to need the adaptive system to create that environment, this system of system environment, which will probably involve, you know, multi OEMs, you know, or multiple products that are completely different, that are at completely different stages of development as well, which some of them are continuously adapting themselves. So you're in a constant state of flux. And ultimately what you have is a whole bunch of providers who are doing their best to provide the best, but then it doesn't necessarily talk, you know, to each other. So in order to integrate, and in order to, you know, have the ability to, you know, federate or interoperate, have these systems interoperate, you're looking for the necessary technology to link them together and fundamentally solve the data problem. Because again, if you keep in mind, you know, of that ultimate goal of wanting to be, you know, achieve those high readiness levels and, you know, deploy, win, and come back, well, it's I guess you're going to want to measure that as well. And so not only do the system of system integration imply a data problem, but you also need that data in order to be able to assess and basically evaluate that state of readiness. So that's where, you know, the data exploitation piece comes in. So in order to integrate that, well, obviously we have that product. We've been doing simulation to C4ISR integration for a while. Regardless, the point is you need that data in order to put together in your environment those tools that are best of breed. And we don't make those other tools, you know, the other industries do, but you know, you need to bring those other tools that are best of breed in order to achieve that level of immersion and that level of training effect that collectively will contribute to you know, to the measured outcomes that you will be able to measure. Because if it's a digital environment, you're going to want to collect that data, then you're going to be able to exploit it.
Thanks, Dan. That's why the experts come up here and talk about that. They can go into it in much greater detail. Now, since this is a workshop, if there are any questions, please raise your hand. We'll move a mic back, because this is being webcast. We'll want to have the questions on a microphone. So, okay. Awesome. So now delivery. So you've got this complex exercise together. How are you going to deliver this thing? Is it going to be in one site or a bunch? Well, one site is kind of cool because everybody gets together. They get to meet each other face to face, like we're doing here. You build more trust that way. And I hate Teams. I hate the remote meetings. But the thing it does is, if you don't have to travel, if there are reservists there, then they're not burning reserve days away traveling back and forth and staying away from home. It's cheaper. So the forces, if they're looking to save money, if you're able to deliver the same experience, whether everybody's together in one group or back home in garrison while they do it, you know, that's kind of a compelling decision there. It's like, save some money, have everybody together, have everybody in their garrisons, and the exercise is 1 week long, and it's just focused on the exercise instead of travel and all the trouble associated with that. Now, if you're in one site, you can maintain situational awareness of how the exercise is going easier normally. But so if you're distributed, it may be harder to keep control. That's one of the things from Maestro's standpoint that helps, is we're able to use that to deliver in multiple sites, and everybody has awareness of exactly where we are in the exercise, which injects have been delivered, which one's coming up. And it's like, holy smokes, the training audience is having problems. We need to slide this next inject 2 hours, and we can do it, and everybody sees it immediately. So it's a way to maintain control in a distributed nature. So we're able to watch that and keep control from an exercise control standpoint pretty well. Tracking the flow, you need to be able to make sure what injects have have come in or gone out to the training audience. What are they handling? What are they working on? So that you know where you are in the exercise, along with tracking on the system. The training objectives, are they being completed and tracked? Let's say the training audience takes a swing at an inject and they don't handle it well. Well, you're going to want to do that again and make sure that they achieve that training objective, because that's the whole reason you're doing this exercise, is you're hitting the training objectives and getting the required outcome. If the training audience hasn't done it right, they need to get another look at that particular problem. And then this is where immersion really pays off, is because, I don't know, having been in the military, sometimes you would do an exercise and go, man, this is really not, it's not pulling me in. And I've helped deliver exercises where you see the training audience, they may be off in the corner looking at their phones or answering emails or whatever, and not playing in the scenario. You want them to be bought into the exercise, into the scenario. You want them to solve this. It should be a problem that is intellectually compelling that they want to solve. And that's what we try and do, is drop them in the scenario and get them to work on it. So, immersion. How much fidelity is enough? So, being a pilot, when I went through, you want people immersed, you want them to believe they're doing something. So from a pilot standpoint, immersion, you would think, is that you get in a dome simulator and it's got actuators and you move and you're getting slapped around. Same thing with tank simulator. If it's full motion, you're getting beat around inside, going over rough terrain, simulated rough terrain. That you think that would be the best? Well, not necessarily. What you want to do is you want to have the training audience believing they're there, and that doesn't necessarily require full motion. I did some work in the F-18 with simulators, part test trainers. Didn't move at all. It was a radar, and you had a small screen up front. And that was the hardest workout I've ever had in my life. We were busy targeting and handing off targeting assignments and flying around, and I came out drenched after an hour and a half. I don't know how many missiles we shot. We got reloaded and everything else, but I was completely bought into the scenario, even though it wasn't moving at all. So that's the trade-off. It's like psychological fidelity is what you're looking for. And that's what, on the bottom right, that's a RAND study that was from 2019, where they talked about, you don't need full motion simulators. You just need psychological fidelity so that the training audience, the person experiencing the training, believes they're there. So we look for ways, like a low fidelity simulator, like a desktop. If you have just a little bit of haptic feedback, that really helps a lot. If you have low, a little bit of haptic with VR goggles, holy smokes, you're in the scenario. I was at visiting a company in Montreal, and they had some haptic feedback devices and different size actuators, from 1.5 to 3 inch to 6 inch. And the 6 inch kind of slapped me around, almost threw me out of the chair. And I was driving they had me in an Abrams, and I was going along and fired the gun. Good Lord. That was pretty cool. I got the VR goggles on and going along. And I felt like I was running across the plains with the Soviet bear attacking and returning fire. It was pretty cool. And that may be all you need. You don't need a gigantic, $50 million simulator on giant stilts if you can get that kind of buy-in for a fraction of the cost. So kind of think about that. Like, how much simulation fidelity do you actually need? So putting it together now, the study on here from a constructivist approach, it means individuals construct their knowledge of the surrounding situation from their interactions that they expect. The more close to realistic it is, the better. That's why when you're talking about role players in live training, if those are realistic interactions, they're going to believe they're there. They're constructing their reality based on that. If you're in a complete simulation environment and you're talking to on the radio, okay, I want to call the KOC. So you call this number, someone answers and they say they're at the KOC. Wow. And they're responding to you appropriately. Well, that's going to drive you further into the exercise and improve the realism. Now, you got to get the right players for that. You're not going to have a KOC person deploying with that group, but you want to have someone who has experience that can respond appropriately to the questions being asked, or provide the support that's expected. That continues to drive the training audience further into that. So a comprehensive synthetic training environment, which, as we said, could include simulation, not necessarily, or simulators, again, not necessarily, but there's a backdrop of a country study. So if it's a make-believe country or countries in the scenario, anybody familiar with a DATE scenario, decisive action training environment? And that's a pretty well-known training environment, used extensively. It's got some websites associated with it. There's a ton of data in there, and you can go in and have these huge country study books that you can then base your own exercise off of. Take bits of that. Okay, we're going to add this over here. We'll have some geopolitical friction that's going to then result in a big fight. So that helps, because the training audience, now that's if the training audience actually reads the the read-in material. Everybody's busy. Sometimes they're not going to do it. So how do you make sure that the entire group has a flavor for what's coming up, and your specialists, probably your intel folks, are going to do the actual reading, or they're going to do keyword searches to find the things they're looking for? Well, we found it useful to have videos that will, either a series of short videos like a news report over a couple of days as they prep for the exercise. It may be a half an hour or a 20-minute video just one time, but it gets the entire training audience going, oh, this is why we're here. There's a UN problem that these two countries have been fighting, or there's a huge migration issue that's dislocating a bunch of different, whatever it happens to be. Have that play out. Now, you need to have access to a media company that can put that together. But there are a few out there that do that. I know NATO does it really well at Joint Warfare Center Stavanger, and we do it in Canada as well, where we make it as realistic as possible so that they know what's going on. And the multiple training levels, you can see on that bottom, it just shows you got the blue situation, the red situation, the white players. So you need, it's not just military v. military. Holy smokes. You look at what's going on in Gaza. I mean, that's it, urban fight, and you've got dislocated people, you've got food shortages, you've got weaponized, should be protected areas, and giant amounts of tunnels. Urban warfare, it's just that's just out of control. But if you don't have those other players to make that environment realistic, then you're going to lose the majority of what's going on there. That's the hard fight for Israel, is how complex that is, the relationships within it. That's all the stuff you need to be thinking about when you're designing an exercise. You need to have a thinking adversary. Sorry. Because that's part of the realism as well. If you have, like we used to, once again, back when I was a pilot, I was an adversary instructor pilot. Thank you. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. We had the tactics. I mean, we knew what formations we would expect to see out of the Soviet Union, and we would deliver that because they expect to see it, but add a flavor to it. If you're going to do a double pince, well, the double pince all of a sudden does this, and now requires the training audience, the fighters, to actually look at the different altitude blocks you're supposed to be, and do that. If they don't do it well, they're going to miss one of the two arms, and that's going to result in a couple of kills, and they got to go back and debrief that. So you want to show kind of what's expected, show some innovation. UAVs, who thought of hanging grenades on UAVs and using those? Well, that's part of innovation. Can you incorporate that into your training, from a live training aspect? I know that National Training Center in the U.S., there were hundreds of UAVs used in a recent exercise. The one thing they couldn't use were the first-person view drones being flown in and hitting friendly tanks. But I think they're going to get that figured out and approved here before too long. So now, not only operating in an environment where you're being looked at constantly, stuff dropped from the air, but also some of these things flying in. I don't know why you couldn't fly a first-person view drone into an Abrams. It's not going to hurt it. I guess they just kind of were squeamish about that for some reason. But that's another way to incorporate it. A learning, thinking adversary who can give you a tough fight and a punch in the nose, because you're not, the goal is to bring everybody back, but the reality in major combat ops is that's not going to happen. And you want to do that, you want to see that thinking adversary in training instead of meeting them for the first time when the missiles are actually inbound, because you need a bit of time to be able to work through all the stimulation from warfare. Like when we, for us, when I went through Top Gun, it was you overloaded the students with what was coming so that they'd be able to handle in the real world it'd probably be a simpler problem. But what really ramps it up is that there are going to be missiles coming. If you don't handle it right, you're going to be, if you're lucky, floating down in a parachute. And you're just thinking on stem power at that point. You need to have the mental and muscle memory to handle a tough situation almost by instinct. And that's what you're looking for from training. And then using current or near current orbats. I've done training where some of the equipment on there was super old. And like, that's not realistic, and that kind of pulls you out of the scenario as well. So you want to have current capabilities. It may be cheaper to just we use this exercise for the last 15 years. There are no F-35s in there. Where are the current missiles? If it's not in there, you need to be able to use it. You need to train to that, both from a friendly side as well as adversary. All right. I'm going to ask Eric to come up now and look and talk about how we're looking at artificial intelligence. What are the limitations? What's the value of it? And he's, like I said, our expert.
Thanks, Jay. I just want to quickly point out how quickly you gave up owing beers to the team. I think we're at 2. And I'm still recovering from the first 2 days of DSET from that. So, yeah. Just before I start, just a show of hands on who believes in the hype of AI right now. Okay, got one. Who's in the middle right now? You're not quite sure. Okay, and then who's just like, it's not. Okay, perfect. All right, good. Let's see here. So what I wanted to do is just kind of take a little time to look back. We want to look at, there's been transformations in the past. So what did that look like? And maybe that gives us some insight to looking at how AI might be transformative for us now. And so when you look back, we had steam engines, and that was a system that was used, and electricity kind of came about, and people could see that it was transformative and it was going to change things, but the value proposition wasn't quite there at the beginning. Lighting a light bulb, that didn't, there wasn't wiring in houses. And so I guess the thing there is it takes time for these transformations to kind of, we can see them, but it takes time for them to actually take effect. And so, didn't see it in houses. And when you look at factory designs, you had steam engines powering factories, and it kind of forced the level of design, vertical design in factories. Point systems, the motors kind of running off the drive, kind of forced how that system was designed around. And so when electricity came in, factory owners, I do believe, kind of felt like they saw what was going to come from that. But they were stuck in an old system design. So they did start to change out some of these point systems. They started using electric motors, they ran some wires, but they're still stuck with that old factory design. And so it took time, just like it took time for houses to be wired and replaced, candles and oil lamps. There was no appliances for your kitchen yet, so the value of putting in those wires, it didn't really make sense. And so over time, as new factories got built, they started to look at this new system in a different way, and they were able to design factories in a very different way. Things became vertical. They could put things and motors in places, these point systems in places that it made more sense to bring in materials. And so it takes time for us to do that. And right now, when we look at AI, we're in a stage where, we've got old systems, we're trying to apply a new technology to that. It doesn't necessarily always feel like the value proposition is there. We're experimenting right now. We're finding use cases. So the question really becomes, what will that new system look like when we're not thinking about what to do new with the old, but when we're doing new with the new? So to me, that just kind of highlights, if we look back, what it might mean. And this is where I feel like we're at that early stage. We're kind of laying that light bulb up, and we're trying to figure out how to apply it to the systems that have been around when we didn't have this technology. Jay kind of highlighted, the Maestro AD. We've got a co-pilot in there. We've been experimenting. We're trying to figure out, where are the use cases? And I think that's really the key thing, is finding those very useful use cases right off the bat. Where is the high value things that you're doing, and how AI might change or evolve those particular tasks. So one of the things, because we do a lot of writing law scenario development, we looked at writing could we use this to write content for exercises? Can we do it? It's easy to kind of get the LLM to kind of produce text, but can we do it based on context? Can we do it based on what we know is in the exercise, the training objectives, what we've done in the past? And so we've been doing that, doing a lot of experimentation. We're getting, I think, good success out of that. It doesn't replace the human. That's why it's called a co-pilot. We don't expect that, that AI is going to take the role of an experienced military individual who knows what to write and when to write it. But can the co-pilot make that easier once they've had that human level thought? I think it can. The other thing we're doing is having it query data, connecting into that synthetic environment, allowing us to ask questions to see if that can help drive us to the next decision that has to happen in the exercise. So we're experimenting with that. We're having some success in trying to, it's helping us drive what kind of questions do we need to be asking, and how can this aid us? How can this support us? It's not meant to drive everything. So we're doing that now. Summarization, that's kind of it was a bit of low-hanging fruit for there, being able to summarize observations, events, and injects. And so there's just a whole host of other kinds of tasks that we're thinking about looking at. The interesting thing about a co-pilot is it's not just one thing. So there's a level of complexity. I think people think talking to LLMs, if you use ChatGPT, which I'm sure everybody in the room has, just type it in and it's a black box and it'll easily return. But when you're building out a co-pilot, there's a level of orchestration that needs to happen. You need to figure out, well, what is the user asking for? And every task that might be accomplished in your co-pilot is a complex set of instructions and context and chat history that needs to be orchestrated with the model. So there's a lot more to it than people might realize. So in terms of practical advice, I think, I just reiterate, finding those relevant use cases, and really that really comes from working with subject matter experts. I usually, when we develop software, we get requirements, developers go away, they build something, come back and go, here you go. In our experience, you need to bring your SMEs inside the development tent when you're working on AI, because it's often your experts that know how to say something when and just the words they use, it will tweak the model differently. And so we found that that's really useful to have them there. They also know how to look at the output and go, that doesn't make sense. We need to tweak that, and trying to get the right mixture of context and instructions to kind of get the model to help you to produce the result that you want. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go together, go far. That's a common phrase. And I think with AI, I think if you want to go fast or far, you need to partner. And I think that's one of the things that we're, if you look at the big technology companies, they've recognized that. I've certainly recognized that. We're leveraging other people with experience, but also relying on our partnerships with big tech companies to try and understand this technology better, help define and avoid the pitfalls of using this technology. And so not only are we relying on our partners, but we also are a good partner to work with in terms of looking at those use cases and seeing if we can't get AI to AI to produce the result that we want. And I think that, back to you, Jay.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, just a couple of the things on AI. We had the panel on data analytics Tuesday, and there were some questions along those lines. And obviously AI, to look at the data that's come out that you're able to capture, how are you able to capture the data is one of the biggies. How much historical data is still valuable? One of the gentlemen mentioned that, yeah, we got this data, but we don't have any weather related to it to put some context in place on that data. So and I'm not sure exactly what he's talking about, but if you were looking at accuracy from an artillery, you're doing an exercise with artillery support and you're trying to gauge how accurate they are. And, certain days it's like really bad and other days it's pretty good. If you incorporate weather, like, is it overcast? What kind of spotting do you have for correction? If you use that large language model to look at, import this data, and now go to the weather station or wherever all that weather data is, incorporate that. Tell me what you find out of that. That's some way to rationalize historical data that may have been incomplete when it was gathered, but may help you with that. And the more data you have coming in, when we did that panel as well, from an individual training aspect, can it pull what was the emotion of that individual? If you've got the sensors available for that's where it's really key in helping. And from a training aspect, that really helps and analyze and look at all of the data generated. Because holy smokes, you can imagine what Dan was talking about from Vicky, virtual command control interface. You got a couple different simulation systems going with hundreds of entities down inside, and how much data is being generated from that. It's massive. And you're not going to have a human look through that. You need some way to rationalize that and use it. Well, you don't have to, but if you want to get the best value out of the training, you want to deliver an immersive exercise and be able to pull that data out and debrief the unit or the people and help them improve their performance. If you can do it real time for individual training, then you can shorten the amount of time of training, or really have a baseline graduate level coming out where your super performers can finish the training in 2 weeks, and your people that are a little bit slower, maybe it takes 4 weeks, but in general average, you're probably getting graduates faster, and you know what the quality is because you've got all that data. So, any questions at this point? Okay. And a couple of people scratching. I was like, oh, let me grab a microphone. Never mind. So modern warfare, we've talked about kind of the baseline generic. Well, looking at Ukraine and what's going on in Gaza, we've got there are some things you can pull out that you need to refine your training on, because if you don't, you're not necessarily going to be successful given what's going on right now. So, whoops. Oh, man. All right. Anyone know who this is? Mike Tyson, absolutely. Yeah. His famous quote, and I don't know why it's not on there, was everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So, and that's the thing. It's like, you want to get punched in the mouth in simulation. It's like, okay, well, that one really hurt, even though I've still got all my teeth. But in real life, you're not going to have all your teeth. If he hit you like that, you were probably, it was probably a good night. So what are the challenges for training? What are some of the things that we've pulled out of this that you really want to focus on for current training? And number one, what do you need to do? What we're seeing in Ukraine, you need to move, hide, find and strike the enemy, move again before you've got returning fire, hide, and be ready to continue that cycle the entire time. Because if you don't, you're going to be on the receiving end of either a ballistic missile or some other type of attack. You got to do all that while you're operating in an air and electromagnetic denied environment. I mean, the jamming, there's so much jamming going on over there right now. You could probably take a raw hot dog, put it on the end of a stick, stand in a trench, hold the thing up, and it'll be cooked in about 2 minutes. It's crazy how much jamming and electronic attack is going on right now. So you got to operate in it. And I got to tell you, we have not done a good job on the West of focusing on that. The former Soviet Union, the Russians, that's one of their key things. If the Turcotte 2 or 4, they jamming satellites in low Earth orbit, or they said they could jam the AWACS. That's putting a lot of trons out, and that's just things that we did not focus on because we expected to have air superiority, and everything's a standoff, and we can operate successfully there. Emissions control and emissions detection. You turn one computer on, and that can be detected at range, and now you're on the receiving end of a barrage. So those are things you need to think about and work. So key enablers: movement. We just talked about data analytics. How long has the unit been stationary? You talk to during an exercise. Okay, you're ordered to go to this point, and how long were you stationary along the way? Maybe they had to get fuel and they got bogged down, or it took them a while to move. All that time they're stationary, they could be picked up by either satellites or UAVs overhead, which some of which could strike immediately. So if you're not moving, you're stationary, you're a target. Control camouflage concealment detection, CCD. If you're not moving, you better be hidden. Whether it's with camouflage, you're parked in barns, whatever you can do to reduce your signature, both electromagnetic and visual, is something that needs to be trained to. I was at Wainwright in 2016 on that exercise, and they had a Cessna flying around with a ball on it, with a FLIR or camera, and they were just going over the friendly positions, and there are guys that are standing outside, the mess hall, smoke at night, and everything lights up as they fire up their cigarettes, and it's like it highlighted exactly where they were. No attempt to hide. So I'm thinking, you need to incorporate in this some type of attack that would show they're making no attempt to hide whatsoever. If you don't practice that in training, you're not going to have the skills or even think about it in the real world until you get that first thermobaric barrage coming down on your heads. And then, oh yeah, we probably should have done something about that. Airplanes, airfields, you can't hide those. In World War II, they tried painting some runways and hiding the actual runways. And so they painted the ground to look like a runway. Is that effective? It depends. You got precision ordnance coming in, going to coordinates only. It's going to hit what the coordinates show. If it's coming in to try and using a visual data match to sweeten the hit in a GPS denied environment, it might hit the decoy. So need to think about that and disperse the airplanes so they're not all packed together. Navy, that's pretty hard to hide. You've got to use environmentals and speed for the most part, and same thing with emissions reduction as best you can. Target identification. The kill chain needs to be as short as possible. So how you feed that, you need to figure out how you're incorporating your detection capability going into the joint fires to get to then to turn around and kill it. So that how you figure out how you're going to incorporate UAVs or whatever you're using for detection, whether it's satellite, and you can turn the satellite imagery around pretty quickly. Worked with a gentleman in Canada, and they actually used satellite imagery, real time, in Wainwright this last year to do exactly that. Where as they went over, they took pictures. It was emailed in within 60 minutes. They were able to walk over to the adversary and the friendlies and go, here's the overhead pass from 60 minutes ago. How cool is that? I mean, how often have you been in an exercise where you could take real world satellite imagery that was taken within the last hour and provided to the participants? Your imagery analysts, we get a field day on that. Same thing with your intel folks. It's a pretty cool capability, not outrageously expensive. So it may be something you want to incorporate. And then So you find those things. Now you got to compress the kill chain. How are your processes? You need to have the kill chain process from detection. It needs to come in for a strike decision. If you're talking combat engagement instead of the 5-step targeting process, you need to have that as short as possible. What are you going to kill it with? What kind of capabilities do you have? Make sure you're exercising those so that they can be as proficient as possible. So when you get out there in the field forward deployed, you're going to be able to execute that strike mission as quickly as possible. And then electromagnetic attack, protection, collection. You got to watch your emissions. You got to operate in a denied environment. How often do we do that? Oh man, you talk to the training audience. Yeah, we're going to kill your comms for 6 hours here, and you're going to lose your battle management system. And we can't do that. We're training. We're supposed to be good. Well, we'll give you 3 days to work up to that, and then you're going to have to figure out how you're going to operate in a completely denied environment. So that's a hard sell sometimes to the commanding officer. But if you don't practice that, you're going to have trouble in the real world. Contested logistics and mass casualties. It's a biggie. So, logistics, striking your opponent when they have their assets collected in one area, whether it's fuel or ordnance, weapons cache, means you don't have to blow that stuff up individually. If you can hit it once, smoke it one time, and you take out 30 tanks that are on a train, you don't have to plank those 30 individual times. You do it all at once. Interdiction, that's, as an air power enthusiast, you don't win wars with air power. What you do with air power is you enable the joint forces to move, but you remove pieces from your opponent's board. If you can, like we've got 2 cats, and when you play chess, there's no other place I want to be than right on top of the chessboard. So if it's like having the cat come in and knock your opponent's stuff down and take them all out at once. That's what you're looking for. Interdiction is going to be a key part of that, and identifying that target of opportunity, that time-sensitive target, high payoff target. It should be things that your training is looking for. The loss of vehicles, from a friendly standpoint, we have sufficient number of logistics vehicles to move stuff that's expected for forces, not necessarily forces in major combat ops, going through thousands of artillery rounds and millions of gallons of fuel per day sort of thing. So that alone, the demand from major combat ops above regular ops that's probably a shortcoming. If you look at it from a NATO standpoint, there's probably not enough stuff there. And that's not including, you expect to be on the receiving end. If your opponent can find those, that's a high payoff target for your opponent. They want to hit those things. So you got to figure out how you're going to hide those, and how are you going to operate when that gets taken out. Now, a lot of different simulation systems, you can plug in logistics. You can do logistics play. And I've done enough exercises where the training audience goes, we don't really want a limitation on artillery rounds or what kind of ordnance we can expend or fuel. We just want unlimited. How valuable? I mean, that's not really training to what's expected in the real world. So you want to incorporate that as much as possible so they can see the problems. And if they grind to a halt, if you run out of fuel, even though you got all your ordnance, you're not moving anywhere. You're a stationary target, and we know how long you're going to last. If you've got fuel, but you run out of ordnance, well, all you got is harsh language. Or you can move fast and get out of the way. You run out of both, well, you just abandon the vehicle and maybe throw a camo net over it and run away. But you can put that into simulation systems to help track that and then show the audience. So from data analytics standpoint, that's going to be valuable feedback. Like, okay, yeah, you took the town, but you used 300% of your ordnance and 250% of your fuel, and you got nothing left. So that's stuff they need to take with them. And then surge. So you look at the number of casualties. In a standard NATO we have air superiority situation. You don't expect to be on the receiving end and have as many casualties as are happening in Ukraine on both sides. Hundreds, if not 1,000 Russians killed per day, or at least killed and injured, and probably a couple hundred Ukrainians. How are you handling that? There's the golden minute or golden hour in Afghanistan. Do you have enough medevac helicopters to remove that many casualties from the front lines, get them back? Do you have enough medical people in place to handle that? Can you track them all? Holy smoke! That number of casualties is staggering when you start thinking about it from a NATO or friendly force standpoint. Your air medical evacuation team is probably not nearly robust enough to handle that. So that should be something that's incorporated into training. And we're adding that. We've got a medical triage VR capability that we're bringing online, which is pretty cool, where you could have a remote, practice trained to a remote triage capability, and then do that with an actual operational remote triage capability in real life. So it's something that you should be looking at. Contested air, maritime, cyber, social media, space domains. These are real key parts of modern warfare, and I don't think we consider it quite enough. Or if we do, it's hard to play. Or if we want to play, is it focused? A lot of commanders will go, grab me some space and cyber on this next exercise. I want to make sure we're playing in that. Well, if that's the guidance you get, what's a training deliverer supposed to do for that? It makes it pretty tough. So planning to operate under air and missile attack without sanctuary, or where air defense can be overwhelmed by mass attack, which we're seeing. Now, I got to tell you, I was impressed by the amount of shoot downs that happened when Iran took multiple shots at Israel. Hundreds of missiles, a lot of ballistic missiles, huge number of drones. So you saturate the area with low cost drones from an asymmetric warfare standpoint, and we're friendly. We're firing missiles at it because we don't really have a great answer to it at the moment, but we're working on it. Then you start running out of bullets in your chamber to continue to handle more complex and more destructive systems coming down range. If you fire a complete volley, all your batteries are empty, and then here come the ballistic missiles. Oh, that's not good. And now you're going to be on the receiving end of those. So how you handle it? What are the different layers of defense that you're looking to put in place? And there are not enough air defense systems in Europe right now. At a briefing, I can't really tell you which one. I was at a conference in October, and they said there were more surface-to-air missile defensive sites in Ukraine than remained in Europe. So the majority of the systems were in Ukraine that are over here. And you're not going to have full protection of Europe. It's a really big area, and there aren't enough systems to begin with, and a lot of them are already in another country. So that's what that means, is you got to operate under the threat of attack, either air, helicopter, missiles. Pretty nasty. Operating with degraded comms, either data or voice comms, certainly something that you should be able to do. You're talking now about mission command. That's really the key. All the units should understand what you're doing. What's the plan? How do you operate to that? And what I mean by that is all the commanders and sub-commanders know what the plan is. That's been put out when you've got communications. If it gets severed, they need to go to, they know how they need to operate, what they need to do. If they're not getting the calls, go do it anyhow. You know what the boss wants. So. Countering propaganda. That's all several three-armed individuals in AI-generated propaganda. And propaganda will get out and is released almost immediately and then amplified by bots. How do you handle that? And everyone goes, well, that's an operational or a strategic problem. Is it? I mean, you got to be able to handle this stuff. Local commanders, if let's say there's a unit in a small town, and all of a sudden there's a propaganda attack, goes out on social media, amplified, that the local commander had, killed a 3-year-old by running over them on their bicycle. It's not true, but how long is it going to take the strategic level headquarters to answer that? You got to answer it now. So the response to that needs to be pushed down to the units that are in the field to respond to it and correct that, or at least put a different narrative out. Because if that narrative is out for 2-3 days, amplified by bots, that's the story, and the newspapers pick it up very quickly, and that's what's run and put out. Even though if there's a correction, it's not going to be on the front page in 3-inch type. It's going to be, if you read an actual newspaper, it's going to be in the back somewhere going, yes, we've determined that was in fact fake. So how do you handle that? You got to have teams looking at that. How do you play it? I mean, anybody play social media in their exercises? Yeah, that's one of the things that the co-pilot can do. You can generate, because you think about it, most of the people putting together an exercise look like me. They're not typists. We didn't hire them to be typists. We hired them to be experts. And if you're trying to type up stuff, the two, or maybe the experts are 4-fingered typists. So it takes them forever to generate stuff. That's why the co-pilot I really like so much, AI generation, to help with both the orders and everything else for that exercise, but also it helps you generate content like social media, because you need, if the only social media posts you have in an exercise are ones you want the training audience to look at, that's all they're getting. It's like, oh wow, there's a social media post there. I wonder what's on there. We should probably take a look at that. Yeah, but you need to flood the zone with a bunch of crap that's just like, hey George, how you doing? Happy birthday to Frank, all that kind of stuff, so that you can hide these other posts in there. But it's, we got a couple of different capabilities or ways to do that. It's something you want volume, and you want it to just kind of show a normal day. There are privacy problems with taking a social media feed and scrubbing it and then trying to put it back into exercise play. So if you just have HAL 9 or Cal 9000 generated for you, then you're in you've got something to work with. Training for cyber. So that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier. How do you train for cyber? Well, it's a lot of countries, it's just defensive cyber only. Now the change is going to offensive. Why? I mean, it's about time. We've been fighting with at least one hand tied behind our back. Everybody we're going to go against has an offensive cyber capability, and they are continuously attacking. So we are putting in place teaming to put an offensive cyber range in place for, it'll be cloud-based. It could be in Canada, or other areas can use it to actually go on into an environment and work hacking systems and different systems. Basically just trying to hack different things and impacting that. So that'll give the teams a bit to work on. Once again, is that going to be at a tactical level, operational level, at a national level? Usually at a national level, but you need to have some kind of capability to train from an offensive standpoint. And space disruption. I talked about the low Earth orbit satellites being jammed. The positive is that there are hundreds of low Earth orbit visuals or optical satellites airborne, thanks to a bunch of different companies, Planet Labs, and there are 3 or 4 different ones. Now that's good for us. It gives us a backup on the big 3-letter agency satellites that are airborne, in case there's a problem with them. But your opponent also has access to all those. Yeah, we used to talk about, I remember in the late, or like 2008, 2009, yeah, here's the deal. We'll just go in, we're going to buy up all the satellite feed, all the imagery feed from these commercial satellites. Well, if there are multiple different countries doing it, multiple companies doing it, and there are a crap load of satellites airborne, you can't buy them all. So that your opponent's going to have access to imagery. So that's a problem. If they jam yours, you're probably now looking at a slightly degraded capability. Any questions at this point? Okay. So to wrap this up, and then we can go into Q&A. Do we have time? Yes, still got a little bit of time. All right. You want to train hard, right? Like I said, you want to, if you're going to take a punch in the mouth, you want to do it with ones and zeros in training than in the real world. So your opponent should be smart and lethal, trying to kill you. And AI can help with that from looking through the data analytics and helping you prepare and correct what you're seeing in your training. Mission command, you want to have the ability to operate in comms denied environment, comms and data denied environment, where you can go to a common point and carry out and execute the mission. And if you don't train to that, it's not something you can necessarily try or do on the first try. Looking at lethal targeting with cyber and EA, electronic attack, how do you incorporate those? How do you look at tying those into the exercise and the processes that are involved in that? Again, it's electromagnetic warfare, not necessarily something that we've looked at, done a lot of. The knowledge base is fairly low. You need to train to that in order to get smarter in it and make sure your processes work. Train for continual interdiction. You're going to be contested across the board. Figure out ways to throw that into the exercise, make it hard for the training audience, contest them everywhere. In Canada, I'm not a huge hockey fan. I'm a Ohio State Buckeyes U.S. college football fan. But in Canada, hockey is the big thing. And if you want to not give an open net shot to your opponent, or the goalie's not standing there to try and block the puck, don't give your opponent an open net in training so that you're ready in real life. Train for speed. You got to move. That's one of the key things that came out of that conference I was at in October, is they were moving Ukrainian, the large headquarters size forces were moving within 2 days, every 2 days. And they just talked about the manpower required to do that. It was staggering. It's one thing to think about, you're going to move your headquarters, division level, corps, every couple days. Just doing it with the people, the staff and the commander is an awful disruptive thing to do. But the number of people required to support that move was staggering. And it's going to be highlighted. So you got to do it as clandestinely as possible. So you got to practice that. You're not just digging in. You're going to have to move. Train for lethality. Talked about your queuing, your joint fires. What kind of information do you have coming in? Do you have a joint fires integration cell? How well trained are the people that are in that cell? How quickly can they help you? And can you get that kill chain compressed as much as possible? And then air defense, artillery queuing, you got to be fast. You got to know when missiles are coming in. Again, your radar may be degraded, maybe down. The Ukrainians had a great solution with cameras on cell towers that were coming in. You got a giant amount of data coming in to help queue the air defense systems to take out the inbound Shahed and different missiles that were being shot. All right. So that concludes the output. If there are any questions, we're happy to answer those. Otherwise, I'll hold off on that just for a second. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. Sure.
Yes. Working.
Hi, yeah, I'm not from a military background, but during your talk, I was thinking that maybe during wartime, a lot of the innovation you saw around the UAVs with grenades attached to them come from the ground troops, trying something out, taking a risk during wartime, where their goal is ultimately to keep on living, as you were saying.
Yep.
How do you think simulations and training are set up to allow them to take risks during those in a kind of safer environment, rather than following procedure and making sure they're following the tactics that's dictated from up high?
That's a great question, and that's one of the things we've talked about. Is like because no person can come up with a list of things that they would never think about. So how do you need to be able to get innovative ideas coming in from the troops. And one of the things we talked about was if you had first-person view drones being flown by the soldier of the month or whatever, then that would, once that happens now, or there's an innovative idea contest or whatever happens, you can start to incorporate those. You kind of almost have to be in the environment, living that reality to start thinking, holy smokes, I do not like how this is going. How are we going to correct this? But doing it in simulation training, incorporating that, like innovative ideas, and going around. So the commander, it's not necessarily the commander's job, but if you had an innovative, someone on the staff that was in charge of innovation, going around and talking to the troops, because you got to go to them. You got to drink a coffee with them and see how bleary-eyed they are, because they haven't slept in 2 days, but and get their ideas. That's probably the best way to do it, because you're getting it organically from the forces under training, living the environment, and then try and incorporate it, turn that thing around. What ideas do you have? Well, let's turn that around and do it tomorrow on the exercise, or in 3 hours, if you can put it in the simulation. Yep.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, I can't speak for the British Army, but I can give you a perspective insofar as the approach taken is that once the validation is complete in the collective training activity, particularly in the live environment, there is an opportunity to move on to what's referred to as optimization, where there is latitude for greater risk taking and, in inverted commas, experimentation, without strict adherence to necessarily the doctrine and procedures that would be expected to be followed during a sort of the validation phase. So there is the recognition that is important, is factored into the design and the programming of the training. You guys want that?
Anybody else? Okay, I think we're pretty close to the, oh, we do have a question. Sorry.
Hi, thank you. My name's Jade Hayes. This is perhaps more of a comment than a question that kind of bounced off what this chap was saying over here. And it was, I wonder if you could use AI to take in visuals of the live battlefield, and based on that, those live visuals, as well as previous war game data, could the AI then make recommendations or highlight risks?
Yeah, it's a great question, and that's some of the things we're looking at. Most nations and NATO are asking for command decision or decision support tools, and AI is looking at that. But I really like where you're going with that, where we could, because like I said, there's an enormous amount of data generated in simulation, and there's an enormous amount of data being collected in the actual war zones. And to put that all together. And that's a beauty of the large language models. The more data it has, the more inferences it can draw from that, and relationships it can draw from it. And that's my pen's over here. I'm going to write that down because I think that's a great idea to look at that and incorporate it and get some points beyond what we just talked about here. Does that
Can I?
Yep,
I'll
yep,
add something. Yeah. So like in principle, I mean, we're already sort of seeing that. You know, like you can in ChatGPT, you can open up the app and you can take a picture. I did a practice plan on paper for my daughter's softball team, and asked it to kind of look at that and add some details to it. So we're already seeing that the technology is capable of doing it. I think now it's experimenting and putting it in the context, the defense context, and saying, what does the model know about this and not know about it? What do we have to tell it in terms of how to interpret it? So I definitely think that's where we can go. There's lots of room to experiment. I think the underlying technology supports that now. It's multimodal now. So I think they're just going to keep adding modes to it. It's going to be just with the latest release, you're seeing you can pull out your app and you can have a conversation. And if you've done that, you'll notice that it's very different than trying to type in a prompt. You can just have a natural engagement with that with the AI, and it feels different. And so I think you're just going to see more modes. So more modes to interact. I'm gesturing, and Jay, I'm sure with his fighter pilot background, when he's gesturing, it's going to be able to take that mode in as well, right? And understand, human level communication better. So I think that's going to, and then the outputs are just going to continue as well, right? So we can see we're generating text, we're generating images, we're going to generate videos, we're going to generate these things together. It's just going to be, I think it's just going to continue to grow. And I think your line of thinking is great. And I think it's something we need to experiment in.
Oh, she's got a follow on.
Thanks very much. Oh, it gave me some nerves talking in this room full of men, so thank you very much. I guess the natural follow-up for me would be then, well, the data management going alongside it, because I love this mushrooming of data, but then keeping a hold of it and keeping mindful of it and how to manage it, I guess would make sense to do that alongside this expansion of awareness and what the AI is tuning into and what data it's going to open up to.
I totally agree. And I think there was a question yesterday about like hallucinations and stuff like that, and how do you keep that under control to some extent. A lot of it's experimentation, but a lot of it is how that data is managed and how you put that data together when you talk to a model. And so the more you can kind of give it the right things and how you can condense that data down in the right ways to give it the best opportunity to answer the query that you have. So that's one way I look at it. I think also, when we talk about data, there's lots of different ways in which we store it and the context for that data. We've talked a bit about that this week. And we've talked about analytics. And I think the challenge there is again, figuring out what pieces we want put together for the right problem that we're trying to solve. And from my perspective, we're still working through that, and I really think it's by use case kind of look is what we're, as best as I've figured out anyway. Hope that kind of answers it.
But incorporating that in design, both for the exercise, so that you get a massive amount of data you need to collect and store and rationalize. That needs to be part of, in addition to simulation and interoperability, how do you handle that data? Where's it going to go? How do you store and rationalize it? So that should be right at the start when you look at it. Yeah. Right. Thank you. All right, I think we're just about at 10:30. Time for one more question if anybody's got one. All right. I want to thank Eric, Dan, and James for helping participate. Thank you all for being up here and participating in this with us. We really enjoyed it. And I guess it's time for Abby. Do you have anything? Okay. All right. So that's all I got. It was a real pleasure. So really enjoyed it. So Abby, please.